Hey, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and start by just checking in and seeing how people are doing with their particular classes, their particular mentorships. And we'll go ahead and start right ahead with Catherine since her microphone's already unmuted.
Hey everyone. So I'm a Palm Fellow, but from several years ago. So I've technically completed my project.
Yeah.
Although I am in the very slow process at the moment of writing it up for a course source article. It's like I'm 75% of the way there, and then like the world crashed down on me for timeline, and I'm like, well, so hoping to get back to it here soon.
Hard with all like the moving parts you have to deal with. So
yeah. And then my mentor is Marina Crowder. She's in she's out at UC oh my gosh, which I just lost it, Davis. And she's great. We're actually we touched in early in January and said let's do like a video chat in February, so we should be getting together again soon, just as like a check in and see how things are going and whatnot. So that's what I'm doing.
All right, thank you. Brian, let's do you next.
Okay. So I'm my mentor. This is my first, I guess, semester. Finished that in the fall with Palm. And my mentors, I'm at UA Little Rock, which my mentor is here also, Mark Bailey.
I thought you were part of that group. I wasn't sure. Okay.
Yeah, we have a few here.
Yeah.
3 of us, and then Mark, the mentor.
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to switch roles starting this fall. I went from a visiting instructor to now an assistant professor.
Cool.
So I've been learning a lot of new things that I need to do and all that. And so a whole nother layer of responsibilities, I guess, that I'm dealing with on top of trying to implement my Palm stuff.
Sure.
I talked to Mark some last year. In fact, also, not to mention, of course, like everybody else being online with everything, an added challenge. So I have yet to send in my video, my initial teaching video. I think I was supposed to do that actually last fall. So I'm going to I need to get started on that to get the feedback of the criteria. I forget what it's called, but that
Copus.
response.
Yeah.
Yeah, Copus, right. We've done a paper on there too, but yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at. I need to get that done. But in reality, I'm implementing some of the things, so that's going pretty well. I did the Mosey Summer Institute last summer, and between that and then working with Mark, since we're on campus sometimes, I'm putting some of that into play. I just need to put it on video and then get feedback and go from there to finish off this semester.
Cool, thank you. Holly.
Hi, I'm at Rocky Mountain College in Billings, Montana, and so is my mentee. She started last semester, actually 2 semesters ago. I still don't think she's implemented her plan yet, but we're starting meeting again on tomorrow. But I think she's partway done with the Copus stuff, but still developing what she was working on before it got derailed. I'm on sabbatical right now, in the best year to be on sabbatical ever.
Yeah.
And I've been doing some research and I do some content development for HHMI Biointeractive.
Oh, cool. Yeah, and where I am, I'm a couple weeks away from needing to implement a couple in-person labs, one in genetics and one in molecular biology. And I have a broad sense of what I'm doing, but I need to figure out logistics because I've made it this far into the pandemic without having to deal with a socially distanced laboratory situation. And so I need to learn from the insights of my colleagues who have been doing this for a while now about what the pitfalls are and how to manage this both by time and by expectations in sort of this weird environment that we find ourselves in. So that's where I am. So let's go ahead and pull up the paper. So as I mentioned, this is one that Sue had picked out. Definitely relevant in terms of contemplation of what it is that allows us to effectively implement a active learning based course. And there is a very simple but informative, let me see if I can get it on the screen, very simple but informative figure here about supports or barriers. So the idea of what is preventing you from developing, as it says there, an evidence-based teaching practice, a high-impact teaching practice, versus what is there to help encourage you to develop said practices. And so what this paper is trying to do is take advantage of the many people who have gone through a summer institute, and by going through a summer institute, being trained up in high impact teaching practices and their benefits, and getting a sense of what supports are present in each environment and what barriers are present in each environment. And through that, maybe generating a composite to understand what supports are critical and what barriers are critical, so that we can best help people to be able to bring these things into their own environments. So you see here in table 1 examples of supports and barriers. And what they do here is they try to define things by 4 broad categories: academic receptivity, logistical concerns, student receptivity, and personal teaching preferences. As always, you can quibble about the particular categories, if there should be more, if there should be less, but this is a decent starting point for us to have the conversation. And I had to look at this a few times, honestly, by just trying to get myself, wrap my brain around the idea of how they're defining a support and how they're defining a barrier. When I just look at some of these, it originally looks like just, oh, you're taking the same statement and just making it a positive or making it a negative. And so I had to think about it a little bit more to understand sort of where they're going here in categorizing um, what's available as a support, and then what is an obstruction, what is something that may be preventing you from taking care of a class. So just the logistic example, for instance, I am able to cover the material. I do not have enough class space for group activities. So there's sort of 2 sides of the same coin. It could speak to just simply how your classes are structured in terms of number of times per week, number of hours of meeting, things like that, of being a support or maybe simultaneously being an obstruction. So this is something, like I said, that I had to stew around in my brain a bit, but I got a sense of what they're trying to go for here. And so you get into these EBTs, evidence-based transfers, which you go to the store, I believe it's electronic bank transfer, and so I had to wrap my brain around that as well. The idea of what supports they saw and the idea of what barriers they saw, and it takes you, and we'll come back to these. Here, you have the central high impact practices that they are looking to see are being done or not being done by these alumni of the Summer Institute. So you go down the list top to bottom here, and you can see what percentage of the alumni are actually engaging in these practices. And this is used by the authors to generate an implementation score, as it were, some kind of numerical value that suggests how much or how little high impact practice has been integrated. And then how is that associated with the supports and the barriers? And then you get to this, probably the central figure. Back it out a bit so we can actually get it all in one figure. Can we go ahead and try to map the supports and map the barriers with respect to each other? Bringing the authors to their, as they mentioned, unexpected conclusion that in fact, what seems to be more critical is an understanding of the supports than the understanding of the barriers. Not that we're arguing against removal of barriers, that's certainly a good thing, but that if you truly want the integration of high impact teaching practices into your curriculum, the most important thing to think about is the positive and not the negative, how to bring in the supports as opposed to how to remove the barriers. So with that as sort of a broad summary, I guess there's a couple questions I have for you guys as a group. Number one would simply be, how valid do you find what they're showing or purporting here based on how this data was collected and analyzed? And then two, go back and look at the supports and go back and look at the barriers, which ones may be especially relevant for your own teaching situation that really resonated with you as you read through this paper. So let me throw those out to you.
Well, I'll jump in here. I really enjoyed this paper for the main reason that I am part of a DEI working group in our department that is focused on instructor initiatives, in that we are trying to figure out how to spread evidence-based teaching, inclusive teaching, anti-racist pedagogies in our group. So I didn't mention what institution I'm at, which I realized after other people mentioned theirs. I'm at the University of Minnesota in the biology teaching and learning department within the College of Biological Sciences. So like, I'm really focused not so much on our department, because like our department's all in on this idea of active learning and whatnot. And not that there's not room for all of us to improve, but like we have the desire to improve.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of like, how can we spread, right? So one of the things I keep thinking about is like, well, what motivates somebody to make the change, right? And so as I was reading this, that was really sort of focused in my brain. And I kept thinking, like, of course, time is going to be a barrier. None of us have very much time. But the choice is always, what do you do with the time, right? You have enough time for X, Y, Z, but what if you did A and then Y and Z? So I think that for me, that's really where the supports come in and why they're overvalued in this versus the barriers being a preventative, is because they, if improvements to course structure is valued in the tenure process, then when I sit down on a day and think about what am I going to do with my day-to-day, I'm going to value making those changes and spending the time there. And that's where I'm going to put my focus versus someplace else. You know what I mean? So for me, like the supports is what allows people to make the choice to overcome the barriers, because there's going to be barriers for everything. And so I thought that was, for me, that was a very interesting sort of like way of thinking about how can I take this into my goal of spreading these types of teaching practices into departments that maybe don't have the same sort of value system as my department.
Did you have a sense in that conversation of what the particular supports were that you were looking at, or did you just have a sense of it was important to just bring those incentives in as opposed to removing barriers? I guess what I'm asking is what degree of specificity did you already know about?
That I came into the paper with?
Well, that particular example with the DEI group.
I guess I'm confused. I was just saying that like I was reading this paper from that lens of using this information in order to better design and implement and promote an instructor initiative. We haven't done it yet. We're in the
all right. Okay.
So I will say that like we're almost done crafting a survey, right? And to get a better sense of our college versus just our department, because I feel like we need to understand the people that we're hoping to help motivate.
Okay.
And so I'm like, well, we need to maybe think about some of these things, like putting them in the survey so that we can better understand their perceptions of support and barriers as it currently is And whether or not that's different, because these are obviously people who have chosen to do a week-long workshop on SI. And so that might be a very different group from the people that I'm trying to infiltrate. So,
I
So
think
go ahead.
I think that at the root of a lot of the barriers are just growth mindset. Like, I've done it this way for forever, and I kind of have a list of excuses why I don't do it another way. Like, not having enough class space for group activities. If I throw a fuss, I can get into another classroom or get my class size reduced. I mean, if you try hard enough, you can definitely get over these barriers. Or I'm not comfortable teaching in an interactive way. There's so much support for if you just go anywhere, even if you just want to read papers or conferences or whatever, but you have to decide that you want to do that. I think at the heart of those barriers, they're kind of excuses to not change a lot of the time.
So you would find that the barriers are easier to resolve than implementing the supports.
Yeah, and I think that the real hurdle, like Catherine said, is just motivation. As that the barriers don't really exist. They're small barriers. It's just the decision to not let them be barriers anymore.
Do you think, I mean, I get what you're saying. Is there a way to help people around, I guess, the mindset that they can't resolve those barriers? Because I think what you're saying is true. I think if somebody firmly believes that they, can't get rid of something or can't resolve something, I'm wondering what the way around that would be. Like that, maybe that's more of a leadership question, honestly, than a classroom question.
I don't know, because I came into an old department that's very set in their ways, and they're actually all wonderful professors and very effective. They don't do active learning, and they don't appreciate why I do it. So, and I've like sent them papers and talked to them about it and had them come sit in my classroom. And I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, I'll lead by example. And if they hear from the students that they like what's going on in my class, maybe they will. And when I co-teach a class, I always push for things. And when I teach somebody a sabbatical replacement, I make it really easy for them to do any active learning that I did in that class. And just try and lead by example, because like firing into a new department and trying to change the way everybody teaches is not the way to do it, I found.
Holly, I feel like you're preaching, man, because like I've only been at the University of Minnesota for just about a year now. And in the department that I was in earlier, I'm like, that was like, you're describing my life there. And actually, I had a note on here under the barriers, right? Because it talks about things like the culture prioritizes research over teaching or blah, blah, blah. And I wrote, well, what about a department that is ambivalent? One where the members don't care what you do as long as you don't force anything upon them.
Yep, that's exactly my department. Like, do whatever you want. We'll do whatever we want. And as long as the students are prepared for the next class, we don't care how you did it.
Brian, how about you? Your feelings about the barriers versus the supports? In my head, S stood for shortcoming there for a second. I'm like, that's not right. Supports and how they work in your class.
Well, it's interesting and hearing this discussion and also in the paper how everything is kind of, when you're reading it, it's like, yeah, I've witnessed that, and I can relate to that by since we've had so many join Palm, and even before that with Mark leading the Summer Teaching Institute, we've had those discussions kind of a lot, maybe more so than some other departments or places. So, and we have a pretty even split on those who are supportive and those not so much. And that's kind of based on the typical things you might think, long time tenured people and set in the ways of doing things. And then also the other side of that is the new people that are adopting these things, and how the discussions come up like, well, what's the point of that? Or how are you going to do that and teach everything to prepare for the next course? so I've heard a lot of the um, supports and also the contrary in my department. So it was a little bit refreshing, I guess, seeing the paper and seeing that this has already kind of been laid out. Um, but we've had about 50% start to adopt some form of active learning or evidence-based teaching. So that's a positive. And the others don't deter us or anything. It's
Yeah.
just kind of a little snarky sometimes, like, what are you doing? That's not necessary or whatever.
Yeah. Sort of a live and let live approach, though, that nobody's actively obstructing anybody from doing something.
Yeah.
Like totally academia, right? Just faculty are like, I want my freedom.
Yeah.
God knows, yes. And you guys, I mean, with our interactions with you guys at Little Rock, you guys sound like you have a community of practice in a sense of getting active learning into your curriculum. So is this an actual active movement among your department I don't know if push is the right word, but to try to get everybody into this kind of work?
Absolutely. So they had a summer institute, but just last week, I think, or
Oh,
the
wow.
week before. Yeah. So they did
It's
it in
funny you
winter.
said you had a summer institute in the middle of January, but yeah, so the poorly named summer institute.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I think probably because it was canceled
yeah,
in
yeah.
this summer, of course. But so the department chair, who also teaches chemistry, he participated, and another who participated before helped as a sponsor in it. So yeah, everybody's kind of there's a good portion who are joining the process and getting on board with it, and so we're working for that. We put it in, more and more encouragement to use things like iClicker. I had never used that
Yeah.
before, and then POGIL activities.
Mhm.
Those are starting to be incorporated into the syllabus, so it's kind of becoming more standard practice for a lot of the, at least up to sophomore level courses, I would say.
So let me go ahead and pull up. There we go. Come on. Let's start with the support list. If I can actually ever get the support list on. There we go. So this is what they came up with for their support list. The ones that are asterisked are the ones that are significantly related to the implementation scores. And you see here, and we've already pretty much started into this conversation of the particular supports on this particular list that are maybe more germane to your particular experience, or things that are especially helpful to your process. I know I'm especially, I think, drawn to some of these ones that are related to group work, since I'm always worried that I'm not administering that right in terms of getting the right groups together, making sure that everyone in a group is contributing. And Brian, you mentioned the POGIL work, and I know that's designed to help keep everybody honest and active and things. But if you look around this list, what supports on here do you guys find especially useful to your own experiences?
I really like iClicker. Um, Using that I love the fact that you can gauge the whole class anonymously and instantly. And the students are very comfortable with it. They like, I guess, probably just having their phone in their hand, but they still are accepting it. And I'm not very good with breakout rooms, so group work on Zoom. So that's probably my weakest point, but iClicker's been positive.
How big is your class? Out curiosity. Um,
30.
so that's a pretty standard size for you guys, like how big your enrollment is.
Yeah, probably so. I've had up to 60, but 30 to
Yeah,
60.
I haven't done a lot of Clicker stuff. A lot of it is I happen to be at a pretty small place, and so it hasn't come up a lot. But even in a small environment, I could see the value in having that anonymity and being able to do some of this work. So I appreciate that. Um, Other thoughts from the group on this?
I was just going to say that I've done a lot of group work on Zoom, and it's probably a completely different demographic because I did it with physician assistant students that are all really highly motivated. But something that I found that worked, first we started with Miro boards. I don't know if you've seen those. It's an electronic whiteboard, and you can put sticky notes on and put comments on. And I would pre-populate those with whatever questions or things, drawings they needed to do. And the creative ones were really excited about those. And the non-creative students were like, this requires too much. So we moved to Google Docs. But both of those I liked because I could keep an eye on all of the groups at once. So I would just be a contributor in all of them. And then I could see who was filling out their Google Doc and then pop into that breakout room like, hey, you need to be focusing a little more on this thing, or wow, you guys are really getting it. So having something that they're contributing to together is really helpful. And I can see at the time that they're all working on it. Instead of like when they hand in a worksheet and it's all in one handwriting, you don't really know.
That's a
But
fair
you can
point.
see-
Like if you're worried about, as I just mentioned, somebody sort of free riding a group project or something like that, or not actively participating, that does give you evidence, right, of making sure there's successful group work.
Mhm.
And Catherine, how about you?
I have to say that, like, I mean, it obviously wasn't a barrier to me jumping in on this, but one of the things that I still find that I have the least confidence on, I guess I won't judge my own skill level, but I'm the least confident or the most anxious about is always managing groups.
Yeah.
Right. Is ensuring that things are equitable, ensuring that, you know, people aren't being silenced, and also ensuring that they're all learning, right?
Yeah, exactly. And how
And
can we
I
be
would
assured of
like,
that?
I'm like, I would attend a workshop that was just about how to manage groups. Like, how do you assign roles? How do you check in and jump in on conversations if they're not going well? How do you evaluate or motivate or award points for participation and, you know, equal participation and effort? And like, I would be all in on that workshop so hard, especially if it was like STEM focused, you know, and not like, because my issues in a group might be very different from like a humanities course. I would be so all in because that's still the thing that I feel the least confident about.
Yeah, I feel you on all of that. That you don't
Can we
want.
write a grant?
Yeah.
Like, I can't teach it. Can we find somebody else too?
Well, and what I've learned, I mean, from this whole enterprise in talking about active learning and the practices associated with it, is that there's a whole sub discipline basically in effective group formation and
Yes.
management, which is so fascinating
Yeah.
to me. But then when you think about it, yeah, I suppose it would all be a study in human psychology and how to best reach people. So I guess that does make sense.
Because like for our like, I don't want to just peg them all as like old, because of course you get like Sue, who is technically retired and is like all in on this active learning.
Of course.
But we'll call them the fixed mindset people, like Holly was talking about.
Yeah.
I feel like one of the big things is like when you move to an active learning environment, you relinquish control, right? Like you are now no longer totally in control of what is being talked about. And if you're not comfortable managing groups like that, right, then that, I mean, like, no, you know, there's going to be a lot of things that you are not going to be willing to try.
Why don't we slide over then?
I don't think all active learning needs to be done in groups though, and I think there's a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
really effective stuff that can be done. If you're not comfortable, if your class is too big for you to manage it, I think that you could very easily do really effective active learning with
Sure.
no group works or
Yeah.
And Brian already alluded to the clicker format, which is a good example of that. But there's certainly, even if you don't have the technology, other ways you could take that approach. Okay, so here you have the barrier approach. I can speak to, I think, concerns about when you do. I've never actually completely flipped a classroom, just as an example here. I'm always adverse or concerned, given maybe the student culture, that I'm not going to be able, or I can't confidently say that my students will actually buy into doing all this stuff on their own. And that may be very cynical on my part and are undervaluing what they would or wouldn't do. For me, that is probably a barrier. And frankly, I would agree on my own brain with what Holly said, that like I could probably get over that, do some thinking and research on that. But for me, that's a concern with respect to a barrier. I've sort of gotten past the ones towards the bottom there about not having enough time for class, about content versus experience. Early on, with sort of these shifting over to active techniques, I absolutely was worried about content distribution, things like that. I've gone through my own sort of reevaluation of what content truly is invaluable content and what is more dispensable, and that's been really transformative for me in having more opportunities to do some fun stuff in class. So those are my experiences with the barriers. How about you?
I think you should give yourself a break because I don't think the data is really there that says you should completely flip your classroom.
Yeah.
I think the partial flip is very respectable.
I find the content one interesting because that was never a barrier in anything I've ever done. In fact, when I first started teaching my very first department, I got this I was teaching intro bio, right? The first semester course, and I had this giant list of material I was supposed to cover. And I didn't tell anybody because I was new there, but I was like, no, just crossing things off the list because I don't know. I was pretty young when I started. I didn't do a postdoc, so I was only 28 when I started teaching.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was very close to my college experience still. And I think I was like, I didn't remember any of this after that semester. So what's the point, right? Why talk about 500 things briefly when I could talk about 50 things in depth? I wasn't that extreme in my trimming. But that's always been my mindset is they're not going to remember most of what we talk about. So I should make what we talk about as memorable as possible, and depth or repetitiveness and making those connections. So content was never a hurdle for me.
We're lucky in that respect. I go back and I look at my my first year genetics, my first year teaching, my first year genetics slides and things like that. I'm like, oh, holy crap. This was really different than what I'm doing now. Not only in terms of content, but in terms of classical versus modern techniques. I came in old school and I was like, oh yeah, this is how, you have to do all this Mendelian stuff and classical stuff. And now I'm like, I spent a day on that. I'm like, let's talk about all this new, I don't know where or how that happened, but it totally happened.
Yeah, I feel you on that, especially also as a genetics prof, right? I totally feel you on that. I came in with the guy before me was old school. It was all fruit flies and everything. And no pipettes were in the lab. And I was like, well.
Mouth pipette?
No pipettes at all. They didn't pipette. It was just
total old school.
How we do genetics anymore.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I'm all about trimming. For me, what I would love to see more of is actually the under the academic category, and more I don't feel like they were very specific in their list in terms of like supportive or not. Maybe, or maybe I thought it needed to be more explicit. But for me, the like in terms of the tenure and promotion process, being explicit about the value of attending teaching workshops and making changes to the classroom and those types of things, like if those were of equal value to research, I feel like people would be willing to invest the time and effort if they were going to get value out of it, my opinion.
Brian, what draws you off this list?
I mean, most of them kind of hit on point, but I don't know that there's any one thing that jumps out to me.
Brian, as a newer person to Palm, can I ask you what drew you to Palm, right? Because that's a time investment. So it's sort of, how did you perceive the process of Palm Fellow, like supports and barriers sort of in this context?
So kind of the way I guess I got into teaching is I was doing a postdoc, and at UALR, they had a opening for a night, because teaching was never, it was postdoc and then pharmaceutical company was my track or plan. But then I started teaching a night class. They allowed me to do it as a postdoc. And once I started teaching, I was a little eye-opening that I liked it. I liked the response from students, and I couldn't shut up about organic chemistry, so they were forced to listen. So that was a good platform for me to, preach. And then really Mark came along and gave a presentation about this idea of active learning, something that I never had any experience in my college career. So I went to the Summer Institute and learned how there's this whole culture of people who have adopted this philosophy. So it was a little eye-opening to me, and I thought, yeah, this because, and then thinking back to my undergraduate career, the professors I had, the ones I remembered are the ones who were using something like this. And I didn't know it at the time, but it's a philosophy. And then when I realized, this is spelled out, there's a whole cell of this stuff. I learned that through Mark. So we did Mosey, and then I started implementing these practices. And then because I was hyper aware now of this culture, I came across Palm, also with the other group at my university. And so I was on board after that to continue that. And then taking all these bits and pieces that I've gotten along the way, trying to implement into my class now that I already enjoy teaching, but being able to step back a little bit and let the students kind of express themselves about the material. So just shutting up sometimes and guiding them to their eureka understanding.
Ultimately, we're talking about limitations here, and it's funny, Brian, because you've mentioned a couple times the Summer Institute. This is the second discussion that we've had on this paper with Palm, and in the first discussion, somebody brought up something I had missed, and that is this entire data set comes from SI alums, and so it's going to be skewed towards people who are at larger schools, people who are working at more research-intensive environments. Do I think these results would change dramatically if I started putting in liberal arts colleges, two-year colleges, things like that? I'm not sure. I noticed Kathy's nodding her head, so I was like, if maybe I can get your perspective on that.
Yeah, that was one of the big things that I was sort of keeping in mind, right, as that little grain
Yeah.
of salt, is these are all people who wanted to go to a week-long summer workshop, right? Like
Fair
they were
enough. Yeah.
willing to invest the time and money into that, and presumably their department was probably paying for it. So right there, you already know that there's some support from the department to do this type of thing, right? So I was like, well, these people are pretty motivated already, which is why like I'm sort of, very interested to see I'm planning to take a few of these questions and stick them in that survey and see what happens when you ask a bunch of professors who haven't wanted to do a week-long workshop. Because I mean, partly it could just be like people are waiting for that support, right? They're waiting
Yeah.
for something to come along that isn't, potentially too time consuming, or is at least easily accessible, that can help them jump in, right? To start the process. Oh, sorry. I bet our trash can just blew open because I just saw a bunch of trash fly across our yard. Okay. I will take care of that when we're done here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm just like, I don't know. I feel like if you asked people that hadn't been to a week-long workshop on EBT practices, that they might have very different perception of barriers.
Yeah. That's actually, I was thinking about it just in terms of size of institution and dedication of institution. That actually is an interesting wrinkle that we hadn't come up with, and that you're sort of in a preaching to the choir environment here if you are surveying people who have elected to do this. That's an interesting point. Overall, any other limitations or things to this paper that people noticed or wanted to bring up?
Yeah, I did notice, so you mentioned about this coming from people who's attended SI and they're likely larger institutions. And I also read something in there about your institution valuing this type of kind of research or effort and the time that it takes and the time that'll take away from research and other things that you're responsible for leading to the traditional tenure.
Yeah.
So like I said, I just started as assistant professor. So I have all those things in front of me now. And even though we have half of the department on board with this, is, the balance of my effort going to be beneficial to me if I put them in active learning versus the research side? I think I was probably hired mostly to begin with for my teaching practices because we want to start adopting this. So we're bringing faculty that will. So that's why I came on. But then also I have a research responsibility. So there's a balance there that I guess I and probably most that do that have to walk.
That's a constant struggle we have when we sort of preach the gospel here on active learning, that very often we're working with people just like you at their very early stages of the tenure process that sometimes can't afford to rock the boat a little too much. It's good in your case that you have a supportive department, at least in terms of the folks that are active with us. But yeah, a conservative approach is sometimes a good approach depending on where you find yourself. And frankly, making sure that you are comfortable with your own curriculum, your own repertoire before you start playing around with it. Sometimes people come in guns a-blazing, they're like, I'm going to do all these things and it's going to be great. I'm like, oh, be gradual, add these things in a little bit at a time, and you'll find you preserve your sanity better when you do it that way.
Yeah, baby steps.
Yeah.
One problem at a small liberal arts college is like we have a choice to do research and we choose how much we weight that. So I could do no
for real.
research, weight all teaching, but student evaluations weight really heavily into my teaching score. So the fact that I'm the only one that does much active learning This
So it's a-
classroom's completely different from any other classroom you've ever seen, and that's going to be painful for the first few weeks.
So that becomes a calculated risk on your part then. If you can weight yourself more of a teaching, then you're staking more of your tenure decision on the backs of the students.
Right, how they like active learning. And
Interesting.
when there's
Which
some
never
data that
goes
shows
well.
that
Yeah.
your evaluations drop because it's harder to
Yep.
do than
Yep.
sit there and listen to a lecture.
Absolutely. And how dare you, why aren't you actually doing this? You're being paid to teach us, all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
Right, why am I teaching myself? You should be
Exactly.
spoon feeding me this.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, with all of the work I've been doing over this last year in our DEI group, a lot of that, I mean, for me, that's really, I think that DEI groups, and I'm assuming most departments have them these days,
Mhm.
need to be pushing for this type of stuff as what is, equitable and inclusive for the students, but then also looking at it from a hiring and retaining perspective of our faculty, right? Because, student evals there's so much research on how problematic they are, right? That
Yeah.
it's like, so how do we handle this in a way that is better, And it's just, I'm hoping that as this spreads and becomes more popular and people are more aware, that it will start to make its way into the tenure and hiring and promotion aspects of the game.
Yeah, and I certainly think that's improved over time, but we're certainly not all the way there. Absolutely.
We complained that evals skewed against young women.
Oh, yeah.
And we were told that our school doesn't have a sexism problem. So we're past that. Our students are very enlightened, so
What's interesting
not an
here-
issue.
This is where I bring up that I work at the rare all male institution, and so our female faculty get especially nailed by that in their evaluations. And I give credit to our administration that they are well aware of the fact that that is a problem, and it's weighted accordingly when female faculty are evaluated. Because despite our best efforts, especially when it's a woman in front of nothing but dudes, there's going to be issues.
And evaluations are anonymous.
Yeah. So.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, on that pleasant note, we're pretty much at time here, but this has been a really good discussion. Actually, it's fun for me. Like, I talk the paper through a bunch of times with different groups, and it's really fun how every time people come up with different sort of subtle things about it. So by the time we get to the last one, I'm going to have all these insightful things to say. I'm like, well, none of these things are my own idea, but I've just been drawing from all of you guys. So I very much appreciate your participation here today. And in a couple weeks, we'll have another paper. This is always where I mentioned, if you have something that you'd like us to talk about, please forward me the paper, and I'm happy to get that into our queue.
Sounds like group.
About doing like a book club. Where's my dang book?
We've never done that. We're not opposed to it. What book do you have in mind?
It's called it must be sitting by my reading chair. It's called it's like interrogating whiteness and relinquishing power. But it's written by white STEM faculty. I'm through the first section. There's like 3 sections. I think it's an interesting process.
We've never done that, and we're at the stage, if you guys have seen the email Sue has sent around, or you went to one of our sessions at the beginning of the year, we're at the stage where we're contemplating what POM will look like in the years to come, because in a couple of years, the original grant will expire, and we want to think about what we do going forward. And so doing things like that are more focused on DEI stuff, yes, but also just thinking of issues beyond our immediate classroom environment could be something we could do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Keep that in mind when we take these ideas down. All right.
All right.
Thank you guys very much, and we'll see you next time.